I'm Shaunik. I'll be the second speaker for side oppositional he, him pronouns.
All right, fantastic. If everyone's ready, I'm just going to give a brief off-time roadmap. Again, I'm the affirmation speaker, so I'm going to go into some topics based on inclusive definitions, value, framework, etc. And then I'm going to go into the two affirmation arguments. So if everyone's ready, start my time now. So proud to propose the emotion at hand. So a couple definitions first. Hedonism. Hedonism, as we define it, is the belief that the highest good is pleasure, right? And this isn't necessarily, we're not saying, not understood not as like indulgence in sensual desires, like, say like drugs or things like just, eating a bunch of soda. But we're saying the freedom from physical pain and like mental distress. So it's really, trying to be happy, trying to achieve things that make you happy. And we define asceticism as a way of life characterized by self-denial and focus on spiritual or religious discipline. This could involve abstaining from worldly pleasures and comforts. And so the value for this round is a fulfilling life, right? Both like philosophies want to achieve a fulfilling life, and I think it's fair that that's what we are trying to go for in this round. And so like the way we want to measure this is through our framework of like individual happiness. Like, is this individual feeling happy? Are they like fulfilled by this? And just by like a brief observation is that this is a value round based on the ought. Like an ought is something like morally, whether or not you should do this. Like you ought to do something, not like you should. It's not indicating like an action. It's like whether or not like you should do it. And so like we also like make an observation that's like a regular person. If you pick anyone in the world to do this, it's not going to be like a serial killer or like a psychopath. I think that's fairly reasonable for us to debate and not have to go into like specific scenarios like, oh, but what if they're a serial killer? Just for like keeping the debate grounded in like reality. So now I'm going to go into the proposition case. So first argument is denial of human nature and of life. Judges, life is finite, right? We only have a certain amount of time on this planet, and so ultimately you should enjoy it to the best you can possibly do so. Asceticism promotes self-denial. It rejects the vitality inherent in human nature. It rejects life's full spectrum, including happiness, sadness, pleasures, and pain. And it instead leads to a limited mode of living. It suppresses genuine emotions and thus cause emotion numbness and inability to be happy. Thus natural instincts like creativity, but a section of prohibition. And so essentially here, when you live in asceticism, you are rejecting pleasure. You don't want to achieve pleasure. You're getting outside the self, and you're doing things like abstaining from comforts, right? And so, listen, judges, human nature is we're social. We want to have friends. We want to be loved, right? These are basic things. And with Hedonism, that is what you're going for. You want to have good relationships. You want to have like healthy habits, like getting a good amount of sleep. Like that is something a hedonist will want. It's not like they might try and characterize this like straw man of hedonism where you just kind of do whatever makes you feel good in the moment, like you do drugs. But ultimately, that's not what hedonism is, because of course addiction, that leads to pain, so a hedonist does not want that. But with asceticism, they're actively rejecting human nature. They're essentially making themselves inhuman. Like what makes humans beautiful is like the relationships we have with people and the fact that we want to be happy. But with asceticism, you see that we're just completely rejecting that. And we suppress like the genuine emotions. A second similar to this is stress. Like when you are a ascetist, it causes increased psychological stress due to the conflict between what one not rely on desires and the rules of asceticism. So basically, like you're essentially with asceticism, you're conflicted. Like your basic human nature is going against your philosophy, right? And that's just not good for you. It's not good for mental health. It's not good for you. Asceticism causes like kind of poor social connections, and it breaks relationships. So simply put here, asceticism is going against the grain. It's going against what your body, what you're, as a human, you are naturally wanting to do. Naturally, you want to feel good. Like, naturally, you want to have good relationships, and simply, asceticism is denying that in an attempt to be noble. Yeah, sure.
If part of human nature is killing, stealing, and pillaging, then why should we promote that as something we embrace?
I would disagree. I don't think human nature is killing, stealing, and pillaging. So, like, at least, and again, I just like to focus like modern times, like maybe if you go back centuries to when, there were very limited resources, that might be more part of human nature, but we would say that in modern times, like that is not really something you're gonna see, like, and again, like a regular person isn't going to be killing, isn't going to be stealing or like pillaging unless they're in extremely dire situations. But in modern times, we don't really see that as often. And so ultimately, I'd also just like to point out, like, killing, stealing, and pillaging for like a regular person, that's not really going to be what makes them happy. That's not going to be bringing pleasure. So a hedonist isn't promoting that. And I'm not saying like asceticism does, but essentially asceticism is just going against what human nature, and it's just creating this internal conflict in the human, and ultimately going back to like our framework of happiness to determine how they have a fulfilling life. If you're constantly clashing with your emotions and just trying to get rid of that, that's not going to make you happy, and ultimately you're just going to be living a life of internal conflict and not be fulfilled. Our second argument is hedonism is more adaptive to modern life. And so again, they brought up this point on pillaging and killing and stealing, right? So asceticism was developed in conditions of material scarcity. Like years ago, when we don't just have easy access to food, we don't just have easy access to shelter. But Judge, we need to consider modern times, right? It says, like, assuming everyone lives the same way, like, the world is not going to change. It's just going to be this individual. And so asceticism is really someone abstaining from these pleasures because it's necessary, because there just simply isn't access to all these things. You have to share with other people. But in the real world, ultimately, that isn't just how it works. We have access to healthcare, food, leisure, and technology, right? These are things that are incredibly abundant in most of our world. And so pleasure is not just allowed in our society, but it's even expected. Think of like mental health movements, right? Society emphasizes self-care and emotional balance, right? We want people to have good mental health. We want people to think positively, and that is what hedonism is going for. And so, like, even think like purposeful rest, enjoyment, relaxation leads to long-term well-being, because simply that is what our society is accepting of. That is what our society allows for and promotes. And so you see that, again, assuming everything in the world stays the same except this one individual, what philosophy is going to best fit the world? And that's ultimately hedonism. Again, asceticism was developed, like they were both developed centuries ago, but asceticism may have been more prevalent when, there was a bunch of disease. We didn't have easy access to food, easy access to shelter, but ultimately this is not the world we live in. And so hedonism embraces life and enjoys what it has to offer, and ultimately asceticism rejects that. And so if you believe that you should embrace life, then you're voting for proposition. Thank you.
Okay. Two quick things. Are judges okay if I sit down while I talk, or is that okay? And then the second thing is, are you guys okay with off-time room maps? Is that okay?
Fine.
Just a quick, I'm going to be going down some top of case stuff, and then onto two disadvantages, and then advantages. An observation, two disadvantages, and advantages. Okay. And then trigger warning, I will be making mentions of like pornography with my speeches, and your dad's gonna kill me if he hears that I talked about this, so like maybe plug your ears for that part, just, okay. But that's all. My time will begin in 3, 2, 1. A couple of years ago, I watched a Rick and Morty episode in which the Rick sells arms to these aliens in exchange for money that he buys candy with. In the episode, he explains that it's rational because the short-term pleasure that he engages in by selling the guns is justified, and as a hedonist, his actions were okay. Now, side government today makes the fatal flaw of saying, actually, a hedonist would not sell the guns to these aliens because they understand that those actions are going to have negative consequences down the line. This is the same argument when they say that, oh, actually, you wouldn't just get addicted to sugar or drugs because that has negative consequences down the line. But Judge, this is not hedonism. That is pragmatism. Hedonism only looks at pleasure within certain actions. So if I pose to somebody, you can eat 12 donuts or you can go to the gym, the hedonist would say, I'll eat 12 donuts, because in the action itself, the hedonism and the short-term pleasure that you get is from eating the donuts. A pragmatist would say that you would work out. However, the side affirmative is promoting for pragmatism, they're promoting hedonism. So to clarify, you would still get addicted to drugs, you would still crave sugar and eat sugar constantly if you were a hedonist, because you look at individual actions and the pleasure that you derive from them. Now going on to the two disadvantages. Disadvantage number one is that of, one top case observation we want to know. They say that the way mechanism is like fulfilling life. We agree with this, but rather we think that individual happiness is not what you look at. You look at personal fulfillment. Which side has the means of achieving personal fulfillment? fulfillment. And we think that they can say that you can achieve that by like generating happiness for yourself, or we are going to say that you get that through self-mastery, which is what asceticism promotes. The neg defends primarily a life of asceticism, but that also leaves plenty of room for short-term hedonist acts. Side negative in this debate does not have to say you just have to be like an ascetist. All we say is that you don't just have to be a hedonist. So that's a big clarification. On the disadvantage number 1 is that of fulfillment. I repeat, fulfillment. We tell you that hedonism short circuits lasting meaning. The warrants for this are multifold. The first is hedonism ignores purpose. Fulfillment is driven by purpose-driven careers, relationships, and causes. We see that those with long-term purpose report like 2.7 times higher life satisfaction than those who like have short-term pleasure and seek short-term pleasure. The second point here is pleasure inherently plateaus. The hedonic treadmill effect, coined by who's that? Brickman shows that we quickly adapt to pleasure, needing more of it to feel the same, which means that we just constantly chase more and more pleasure when we're never able to get it. That leads to this lack of fulfillment. This leads to like addiction and life cycles that numb us over time instead of fulfilling us. The third point here is growth requires discomfort. Psychological growth, resilience, and maturity over time only come through self-sacrifice. Hedonism encourages comfort maximizing behavior, which stalls that growth. The fourth point is false pleasure isn't real, meaning I'll take it at the bottom. People of the conflict comfort without any meaning, but these like diversify over time, right? We tell you that like studies find that people who rank pleasure over purpose have like higher midlife regret rates because they're not able to achieve this pleasure over the long term. The fifth point is that hedonism fragments time. Constant novelty chasing breaks life into disconnected moments, right? It makes it hard to build meaning. You can look at Kahneman's famous like book where he explains that like experiencing.
The book is called Experiencing is
Remembering, which is if we actually experience life properly and if we actually have self-sacrifice, then that's how we're able to build long-term meaning. The impacts of this are threefold. First off, you face chronic emptiness. You feel good in the moment, but because of this hedonic treadmill effect, you constantly chase more and more good things, which are never able to achieve. This is ultimately terrible for your quality of life. Second off, we say that you have existential despair because you're not actually able to continually satisfy this pleasure seeking, while actually achieving self-mastery is something that you can achieve throughout your entire life. And the third point is you never get this sense of fulfillment, which is ultimately ties back to the Wayne mechanism that it's worse for your individual happiness or your own fulfillment. I can take the POI.
I was just going to say that, do you think that a hedonist would try and go through the discomfort to achieve the pleasure?
No, that is a pragmatist, because a pragmatist would look at it and evaluate whether short-term discomfort leads to long-term pleasure, and then they would do it. That is pragmatism, but hedonism exclusively looks at maximizing pleasure for yourself. So it would not sacrifice. The point of this debate round is hedonism does not sacrifice any sort of discomfort in favor of long-term pleasure. So yes, technically going to the gym is experiencing short-term discomfort in order to get long-term pleasure of being healthy, but a hedonist would not do that because they only care about pleasure. Well, a pragmatist might do that, but that's not relevant to this debate round, right? Again, hedonism and happiness are inherently different, right? We tell you that hedonism is short-term happiness, but happiness can just be a long-term happiness or in general. So we said that chasing hedonism does not just mean that you're chasing happiness as a person. It means that you're attempting to, but you will not be able to because of this hedonic treadmill that we talked about. Moving on to the disadvantage number 2, that is of the death paradox. The closer you get to death, the emptier you feel. The claim for this is that hedonism ties to the value of life and the ability to experience pleasure, which means that as people age and pleasure fades, the reason to live erodes. In contrast, asceticism or meaning-driven lives gain depth over time, making the final chapters of life more fulfilling. The warrants for this are threefold. First, pleasure is tied to youth and health. Hedonism depends on sensory gratification, but aging naturally brings physical decline. I'm sorry, I have a lot to get through. Less energy, and also a devalued sense of self and diminished sensations. That means that hedonistic value systems decrease with your bodily functions decrease. The second point here is hedonists report higher later life depression, which makes sense, right? Meta-analysts find that individuals with hedonistic values showed much higher rates of depression in their later life because this existential dread that they experience in adulthood as their ability to experience pleasure erodes rapidly. In other words, Judge, as you get older, you're not able to chase these short-term pleasures that hedonists need so badly, and then you experience this long-term dread. The 3 point here is ascetic values gain strength with age. Virtue-oriented individuals often report a greater life satisfaction in older ages that reflect on personal growth. In other words, fulfillment rises even as your physical ability worsens. The impacts of this are threefold. Number one, hedonism makes mortality actually important, right? Because if life is about pleasure and pleasure fades, then life becomes meaningless under a hedonist perspective, and this lowers your quality of life. Second, this means that meaning-centered lives are better, and ascetics find peace in self-fulfillment. And third, we win on the long-term fulfillment, as the only way to achieve that is achieving long-term happiness. Yeah, and we also tell you that. No, you can get to that. Okay, now on to the advantages. A couple of things here. Again, you can cross-play this idea that overall you're not actually achieving personal fulfillment because you're only doing these for short-term pleasure. You are not a pragmatist, which is what side government assumes you to be. No, you actually are going to get addicted to drugs. You are going to do these terrible things. Another thing I'll note is this big point on human nature. Two responses here. First off, human nature is incredibly harmful. We tell you that there is a reason why the cavemen actually went out and killed and exploited it. We still do that to this day. Everything from the laptops they are using are designed with the intention of exploiting your attention span and your mind in order to get you to do something for somebody else. We have terrible human nature. That is why we build things that are so destructive. That's why we have nuclear bombs. Therefore, playing toward human nature is never the good idea. A great instance of this is the pornography industry, which literally exploits human self-doubt, which literally exploits people's self-doubt and how they feel terrible about themselves, and exploits that insecurity for profit. So absolutely not. Playing to human nature, even if it is natural, is not a good thing. In fact, do the opposite. Be an asceticist. Reject this human nature that is so harmful and find meaning in mastery, which means that you are going to go away from this terrible human nature. On the ad 2, talking about adaptive and modernized, asceticism is not actually old. In fact, it promotes because we still have the same human nature even over time, it's still just as relevant today. For these reasons, I'm so proud to negate. Thank you.
Good. I will be the second speaker of proposition for this debate. I'll be going over brief off-time roadmap. I'll go over the case, counter-refutations, and then refutations. On my first word. Ready, judges? Ready, opponents? All right, judges, let's go over top of the case first, right? Let's go over some definitions. There's this major class about what a hedonist is, and we give you an example or giving you a definition of hedonism, that the highest good is pleasure, right? That freedom from physical pain and mental distress. And we state that it's believed that the highest good is pleasure. It's not from individual actions, but overall. The overall highest good that you want to achieve in life is pleasure. So basically, if you're doing going to the gym, right? Saying that going to the gym in that moment does not bring you pleasure, but overall, it does bring you pleasure. We state that overall, the highest good is still pleasure. So going to the gym is what a hedonist would want. Now, Judge, we're not arguing for the entirety of hedonism, right? We're just arguing for basically a part of hedonism brought up by a philosopher, right? There are many interpretations of that actual philosophy. We're just going off a branch of it. Now, let's go over something, and also, I want to go over what they stated about if you could be both, right? You don't just have to be hedonist or asceticism, you could be both, right? I want to argue that this is just basically, to have a fair debate, right? You could either be hedonist or the other, right? This is what the topic says. As, this house believes that you, as a individual, right? You could either choose hedonist or you could choose asceticism, right? So you're basically given two choices in the topic of the debate. And for them to say, oh, we can make a little of this, we can make a little of that, it's just not the case for the topic of this debate. Now for the counter-refutations, right? The first major refutation to our first argument is that human nature is harmful, right? And that by rejecting human nature, including all of its goods, including happiness, pleasures, pains, by rejecting human nature, you're basically having a fulfilling life. But Judge, as my first speaker said, what kind of fulfilling life are you actually experiencing without happiness? You're emotionally numb. You don't have relationships. You don't have family. You are disconnected from friends. You don't have any social well-being. You're depressed because you don't have friends, because you reimburse that, right? You give up that by being an ascetic. So what self-fulfilling life is the normal person going to have without happiness? And Judge, that is not the life a normal person wants to live, right? That's not the life you want to live. To be emotionally numb, to have no connections, to feel no happiness. Judge, do you really want that as let's say everybody here is a normal person, right? Do you really want to have that? is that actually a fulfilling life for you? Now just let's go over some refutations, right? Let's go over the first argument, right? No long-term meaning. Like basically, the first argument is basically no long-term meaning, right? And they're saying that purpose is better than pleasure, right? Pleasure should not be the long-term goal. That pleasure is not the highest goal. And that self-fulfillment is with purpose. And judge, if it pleasures you to have a purpose in life, to follow your purpose, sure, that's hedonism. If you have a purpose in life and you want to follow that purpose and it brings you pleasure, it brings you happiness to follow a purpose, that's hedonism. We're not like disallowing you to have a purpose. We're just saying that we should value pleasure. And if not having a purpose is what you like, is what brings you happiness, sure, that's what hedonism wants too. We're not denying yourself to have a purpose. And just, even if you want like mass pleasure, right? And if addiction brings you pain, right? Having addiction does not make you happy. It brings you down. It makes you unhappy, like in the long run, right? Or like sometimes it makes you unhappy, it makes you depressed because you have an addiction. Then that's not what hedonism wants.
POI.
It wants you to have the highest good is pleasure. Yeah.
What in your world would you define as a pragmatist?
We didn't really go over that in our debate research, but what we found from the hedonism, or like what this philosophy brings up, like the first definition of hedonism is that the highest good is pleasure overall in life, right? That's what it states. And that freedom from physical pain and mental distress, not as indulgence in sensual desires, but as freedom from physical pain and mental desires. So we're not like saying we want to have indulgence in sensual desires like drugs, like killings. Like we don't want indulgence in sensual desires, right? That's what we bring in. And then they also state that like self-sacrifice is necessary in life to actually have a fulfilling life. That sacrificing yourself, sacrificing your human nature, sacrificing happiness, sacrificing your friends, sacrificing your relations with your family members, that it's necessary for that to follow a purpose and to be fulfilled. And just remember, we're talking about a normal human being. Saying that they have to sacrifice like their entire life for a purpose, that would not bring them pleasure. That would not bring them happiness. How would that bring them fulfillment, knowing that they sacrificed their entire life for a single purpose, right? And they would not even want to like the purpose because they have to follow the asceticism, right? That they conflict, that what they want inside as a human conflicts with the idea of asceticism, with the belief of asceticism, right? So if they want friends, if they want happiness, they can't because they're internally turmoiled by the idea of asceticism, which gives you depression because you're basically clashing with your own philosophy, right? And judge, self-sacrifice is not necessary, like in the modern times, as my first speaker said. That hedonism is better, more well-suited for the modern society, right? This is for like a long time ago, centuries back, when there's like no materials, like that, it's very scarce, right? But right now, we have these materials, we have friends, we have a community, we have healthcare, we have transportation, we have a good life, we have a good living, right? That we could go outside and there's sunshine, right? We're not like, so why would we sacrifice our entire life? Why would we sacrifice shelter? Why would we sacrifice friends, family, in this time of day, in the modern society as a normal human being? Why would that sacrifice them? Why would we sacrifice that as a normal human being, right, Judge? This is suited, self-sacrifice, and this is suited for centuries back, right? This is not suited for modern day society. And the second argument is basically the death paradox, right? Saying that basically you need more happiness as you grow older. And because happiness goes down, pleasures go down, you have no more pleasures at the end of your life, meaning that your life has no meaning, right? Okay, there's just several responses to this. First of all, they said this causes depression because you need more and more happiness. Judge, what makes you think that their asceticism doesn't also cause, take them at the highest point and say okay, at the end of life, you will be depressed. But Judge, what is stopping the other side, asceticism, from also being depressed? They've cut off all family ties. They are emotionally numb. They can't feel happiness, Judge. Do you think that you will be actually self-fulfilled by the end of your life with no emotions, cut off from everything? No, Judge. You won't feel happy. You won't feel self-fulfilled because you did that, right? Also, pleasure isn't just tied to youth, right? You don't get like less happy as you get older. Like my grandpa isn't sad right now. He isn't depressed just because he's old. He's happy. He's happy like at the same rate as like he was young, right? Pleasure isn't tied to youth. And you have to recognize that, Judge. And Judge, them saying like and then like relationships, right? Relationships give you happiness. But Judge, you have to recognize that if you're like old, right? You're old and you're like following asceticism life, right? You will have no relations because of asceticism. You'll be alone by the end of your life. And do you really want that, Judge? That's why, Judge, you should vote for our side. Thank you.
Great speech.
What is that?
All right. First, start in framing. I want to do a lot of like clearing up, and then neg then af. Time begins now. There is a psychological experiment called the pill, and it is this. If you were to take a pill that allows you to feel happiness 100% of the time, no repercussions, you have no mental repercussions, no health repercussions, and nothing else, would you take it? At first, we immediately reject it. Why? Because even though we feel happiness 100% of the time, there is something artificial beyond just happiness that we value as human beings. There is no purpose there. There's no meaning. We just feel happiness, but we feel nothing more. And it's surprising to find that the majority of people would never take that pill. They wouldn't do that because even though they have happiness 100% of the time with no side effects, they feel like they lose purpose, they lose meaning. And that ultimately is where side government loses this round on, because they forget that happiness is not the only intrinsic good. Pleasure is not the only intrinsic good. There are other goods that we as humans strive for that side government completely neglects, and for that reason you can automatically even vote neg right there. But what are problems with hedonism that side government never addresses? First, the paradox of hedonism. Yeah, sure.
So do you think the majority of people would want to take a pill that makes you emotionally numb for the rest of your life?
That's first of all, that's not asceticism, it's not emotionally numb, but we'll get into that later. Okay, on the paradox of hedonism, we accept it on our end. If you look at the fact that what the paradox of hedonism says is that those who are more likely to strive for pleasure are the least likely to get it, but also the least likely to feel fulfilled. Look back to the weighing mechanism for the round, which is personal fulfillment. You are voting for the side that promotes a world and a lifestyle that's the most fulfilling for an individual human being. When you seek pleasure, when you have a hedonic framework, this is called the hedonic treadmill effect, which they drop in their entirety to the MG. Don't let them get new response to the PMR. Because when we seek pleasure, when we actively say, okay, I want to do this activity to maximize my pleasure, most of the time, we actually don't end up maximizing that. Because ultimately, we say that if we're inevitably depressed at the end of our lives because we didn't accomplish enough things, on our end of the house, we accept that. Because our end goal was never to be the most happiest person in the world. Whereas on their end, they have, sorry, I'll get to it at the end, they have a complete existential crisis because their entire goal was to be happy and happy and happy. And guess what? One wrong thing and one bad end state, and their whole life meaning is lost. Their whole, sorry, I'll get to the end. I have a lot to get through. All the fulfillment is lost. This is the biggest way you can vote against side government because there's a high probability that this happens. A lot of us don't feel like we've accomplished everything in our lives, and we don't have the most pleasure and the most happiness. And under a hedonic framework, we always feel like we could have got more. Then, secondly, on the science here, because I think there's a little bit like we're lacking a bit of scientific explanation here. So what like hedonism actually is. Hedons are chemicals in our brains that are literally released. These are short-term chemicals. Don't let them get away with saying that hedonism is a long-term process. You can search up if you don't believe me. The way and the mechanism in which hedonism is calculated is by the presence of hedons. Hedons are chemicals like dopamine, like endorphins, that are released in the brain. And most of the time, these hedons always prefer short-term actions for three reasons. Sorry, I have a lot to get through at the end. I'll take it at the end. The first response here is that it's impossible to predict the future, and thus hedonism always defaults to the present. Why? You never know how you're going to live 20 years from now, 30 years from now, but you do know how you're living right now. Thus, hedonism always gives like more of a weight, more of a magnitude to the current present day, which always means that you're going to be looking at pleasure under a hedonic framework to the current day, to your situation right now. But secondly here, we say here that like hedonism doesn't allow you to experience difficulty because it explicitly tells you to avoid pain at the biggest cost possible. So that means that even if there's some pain that you lose or maybe you don't get as much pleasure, but you have more meaning, Hedonism would never tell you to do that. Once again, the weighing mechanism for this round is fulfillment, not happiness, not hedonism, because if it was happiness, it would be tautological, and the gov would win this round. It's probably unfair. We say fulfillment is probably the way you're going to be voting in this round, insofar as meaning and purpose transcend happiness, transcend hedonism, and transcend pleasure. The gov side of the house is never able to access that. Look to the pill example. Okay, that was just like overview response, and I'm going to do a bunch of like cross-playing of that everywhere now. Okay, now on our DA1 about fulfillment. There's largely no response here. The only response here is that hedonism would tell you to go to the gym. This is not true. Most of the time, we don't go to the gym and feel, for example, I would probably guarantee you that there's more hedons released if you eat 12 donuts and then later on maybe, you know, like you eat 12 donuts, because going to the gym ultimately doesn't give you that much happiness. Like, I don't know someone that goes to the gym and is like, I'm like super happy I'm going to the gym. Why do people go to the gym though? They find purpose. They find meaning. They find something bigger in life, that it's like discipline. They feel good about themselves. And that's not necessarily happiness or pleasure. This is something that transcends beyond that. And also the way that they vote on the gym, like the gym example, is pragmatism, not on hedonism. Because hedonism would always tell you to maximize those short-term hedonic chemicals.
Since it's certain, while long-term is
Yes,
uncertain.
once again, crossplay the certainty in the present day versus the uncertainty in the long future. You never know how you're going to be living like in 20, 30 years. Thus, you're always going to maximize your current present state right now. Buy this with 100% strength of link insofar as it goes dropped. Then we get access to our impacts here, which probably auto-vote negative immediately. First here is chronic emptiness, insofar as the gov side of the house causes existential despair as they pursue a hedonic framework, are never able to achieve that, and always, always, always lose meaning and purpose. That means you can never have a true life of fulfillment. Yeah, that's just like the main impact on DA1. Then, DA2 on death paradox. We say here that like there's also no response here. The only response they're going to go for here in the PMR is that, well, hedonism tells you long-term happiness, so therefore go to the gym and you're going to be happy later on in your life. But that's not the argument we're trying to make. The argument fails for two reasons, as I've already explained before. First, always short-term over long-term, as the hedonism framework calculates. But secondly, most of the time we don't go to the gym for happiness. We go to the gym for meaning and purpose beyond that of just happiness. There are other end states and other intrinsic goods except for happiness. Okay, then, on the advantages. Okay, so their responses here are that like human nature on the average person doesn't tell us to kill other people. That's not the response we're making here. The response we're making here is that inevitably, intrinsically, human nature is flawed. We want to do things that aren't actually good for us in the long term. And I don't know why this is the case. None of us probably know why it's the case, but Daniel Kahneman has done a great job of analyzing why that's happening. He's a Nobel Prize winning like psychologist. He probably knows what he's talking about. Inevitably, what we see here is that when you look at hedonic frameworks that allow you to, we look at the human nature itself, we always want to maximize our pleasure. And then ultimately, if you look at like past like caveman examples like Xander brings up, there were lots of killings, conquests, we glorify war. Look to, yeah?
Are we still cavemen?
No, but the intrinsic same human nature remains. Evolution has told us to always prioritize survival of the fittest. War, disaster, famine, all still happen. We always care about ourselves. Selfishness still exists. That human nature isn't something we always want to continue. Human nature and intrinsic selfishness is not a good thing. Thus, you're voting on the fact that hedonism is a bad thing, inevitably because it is a natural human thing. But also, you can extend the facts like all these other responses. You can cross by the pill, you can cross by the meaning, and the fact that you literally don't get a good life and a life of fulfillment if you pursue hedonism. And really, there's no response here to Xander's responses on the advantage.
That's how we can say that you can be both hedonic and
Oh yeah, also, observation. They say it's not fair if we can pick and choose our ground. All we have to do is negate the resolution. The resolution says that they would choose a life of hedonism over asceticism. We reject that. We say choose a life primarily of asceticism, but somewhat hedonism means obviously we all need to have some sort of fun in our life. That's perfectly fair. That's in the net grounds of today's debate. We are opposing the affirmative side. That's all our burden in today's round is. We say it's probably bad to say you're 100% asceticist, and asceticism just means discipline. It doesn't mean locking out your emotions and being a religious, spiritual caveman. It means saying, okay, I'm going to focus on less happiness, but I'm going to focus on more meaning and more purpose in the long term. Don't let them get away with this complete extreme characterization of asceticism as something that's like, okay, I'm going to reject all happiness, all pleasure, and I'm going to live in a cave and do like a bunch of spiritual rituals. That's not what asceticism is. It's discipline. It's living with a sense of purpose, not with a sense of happiness. For those reasons, yeah, vote off.
Right. Off-time roadmap, just going to be doing some framing, then non-voters and then voters. Is anybody not ready?
No,
Right. My time begins in 3, 2, 1. To the point at which our human nature is still the same as when we were cavemen, even if our society is modernized, I am still so proud to oppose this motion. The first place that we can look is what is the framework in which we are evaluating this debate round. We both say that fulfilling life is the most important thing. Their mechanism is that of happiness, yet we quickly tell you, actually, you look at personal fulfillment, this goes dropped by the MG. What is the implication of this? When you buy that personal fulfillment is the mechanism in which you fulfill life, then you know that you're not just looking at however happy you are, you're looking at whatever fulfills your own self-purpose. Shonik and I both tell you that you are never actually able to achieve personal fulfillment through simply doing everything for happiness. That's the pill example. Because if you were just happy 100% of the time, that doesn't lead to a life of fulfillment, since it's actually numbing your life. Rather, what we tell you is chasing self-mastery and pushing against our indulgences are the way to achieve this personal fulfillment. So right there, just on this simple premise, you can easily vote op on this framing. Then, you can look to the next place, which is the idea that hedonism always looks short-term. This is the biggest thing that you're getting out of the block. This idea that actually hedonists would eat the 12 box of cookies over going to the gym because the cookies release more hedons in your brain than going to the gym, which is what hedonism promotes. And because in your short-term calculus, it's uncertain whether going to the gym will pay off in 30 years and lead to pleasure, but what is certain is that eating the cookies will lead to that happiness for you, so you would eat the cookies. And even if you buy none of that, if none of those responses were good enough for you, you're always certain that what side government is saying when they say you go to the gym because you're experiencing short-term discomfort for long-term happiness is not hedonism. That's pragmatism. And to the point that they don't defend their own burden, which is promoting hedonism and not pragmatism, you can vote opposition there as well. Next, let's move on to some non-voters that are more than just that. The last one here is this idea that human nature is inherently harmful. My example of the pornography industry and the other exploitative nature that we still have today go cold conceded throughout the MG and are yet further proof that even though we are no longer living in caves, we still have the same biological makeup that makes us just as exploitative as we were then. This basically wipes out their entire advantage too, because society modernizing doesn't matter if our human nature is still the exact same. Therefore, you can always know that promoting our human nature and going with human nature is a terrible thing, because that is what leads to the pillaging and destruction that we have experienced for all of our human nature. Then you can look to the first voting issue, which is that of the paradox of hedonism and the hedonic treadmill, which we explained, which is if you practice a life of hedonism, you are inevitably going to chase more and bigger pleasures more and more because you get used to the small pleasures. And that's bad, because then what that means is you're never going to be able to top your pleasures, and you're just going to experience an existential crisis in your midlife and in your later life. This is why people who describe themselves as hedonic have much higher depression rates later in life, and why the hedonic treadmill tells us that over time you're going to have a lower quality of life if you continually chase bigger and bigger pleasures, because eventually when your health lowers and your health lowers and you're no longer as young as you used to be, then you're not going to be able to experience the same amount of happiness. This is the most important impact in this debate round, because the only way that you are going to achieve personal fulfillment is by continually being happy in the long term. And because of the hedonic treadmill, you will not be happy in the long term with a life of hedonism. We tell you that asceticism is not actually extreme. It is pushing you against this destructive human nature that you have, and therefore the side of opposition, one which embraces asceticism in most circumstances, but also grants instances of hedonism, is the best instance in this debate round of achieving personal fulfillment, because this idea of self-mastery, this goes cold conceded throughout the entire debate round. Even if you didn't want to look there, you could look to the idea that we tell you that not having existential impacts and achieving self-mastery is the best way to actually access this life of personal fulfillment. So as a judge, when you vote on personal fulfillment, the first place you look is this hedonic treadmill, which tells you that you face a lower quality of life when you prioritize hedonism. And as op, you don't have to say that you're just going to be an ascetist. You can say that you can do both, and for that reason, I'm so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that speech. I'll be the last speaker for this debate. I have 5 minutes, so just for a brief off-time roadmap, I'm just going to kind of briefly touch up on top of case. I'm going to then go into the points that they brought up in the op block, and then I'm going to finish off by kind of weighing on some voters, and hopefully I get through all that. But on that note, I'm just going to start my time now. So on top of case, listen, Judge, down the bench, my opponents have tried to characterize hedonism, a straw man really. They try to tell you that it is someone who's just going around doing just doing drugs because in that moment they feel maximum pleasure. They bring up this point on like science and hedons. They're short term, and so hedonism is just they want short term pleasure and they don't care about the long term. However, what we have told you down the bench is that someone who wants maximum pleasure is not just caring about the short term. Because we tell you, think about the drug addict example. Is a drug addict going to be happy when they continue to take drugs, when they have a drug addiction? No. So someone who's trying to strive for max pleasure, right? That isn't just short term. That includes their entire life. Max pleasure, they are going to be thinking, they're not going to be going for these addictive behaviors because, again, we tell you in our definition, it is not as indulgence of sensual desires, but as freedom from physical pain and mental distress. Drug addiction is physical and mental distress. That is not what a hedonist would want. Do not let them characterize hedonism this way. And they tell you that we've characterized asceticism in a bad way. Sure, we'll take it, let's just say it's self-discipline. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So now I'm going to go into some things that the second speaker brought up. First of all, just like counter-refutations that they said. So they said that, again, hedonism always care about the short-term versus long-term. They bring up this pill, right? Someone wouldn't take the pill of happiness because, happiness means nothing compared to greater purpose. I'll just like to think for this. Can it be a purpose striving to achieve happiness? If my life, I say, I want to be happy, that is my purpose. So if you buy that striving to achieve happiness can be a purpose, then literally all of their benefits go to our side. And again, do not take their point on short term. A hedonist will not get addicted to drugs because they know that will cause them pain and mental distress. And so, again, this huge point they bring up on human nature, right? They say humans are inherently selfish, we do war. I would like to bring up a couple things. Why do we then give humanitarian aid? If we were still these cavemen people, why do we
Well, I guess no examples are allowed, but like responses to like the barbaric nature of of human behavior was brought up in the LO, not really responded to in the MG, so it's newer reputation in the PMR.
So basically, you said like human nature is harmful, and then my second speaker said that like essentially we aren't human, and I'm just saying like, you brought the examples of like war and stuff, and so I'm just saying that like we don't just do war, we do like these other things. But
Judge discretion.
Judge discretion. So now I'll continue my time now. And so again, they're gonna try and tell you that we're the exact same like those cavemen who are just completely barbaric, who only cared about themselves, and we just kill and we just do horrible things. Judge, I really hope that is not how you see humanity, and it is not what humans really are. Again, we do good things. We want to, make others around us happy because it makes us happy. We want to, stop these, like a lot of people protest wars, right? If it was in human nature to be just violent and have war, then we wouldn't have people like protesting. And again, ultimately what's really important in response is that they think that, just having drugs and doing sex is like a short-term pleasure and that's all hedonists are doing. That is not what hedonist is. Again, they say to themselves, it's maximum pleasure. Let's go back to the gym example, right? If going to the gym causes short-term pain, but hedonists wouldn't care about the long-term pleasure, right? Maximum pleasure, clearly, if you just short-term pain is just a little pain, and then you have happiness. Yeah, I went to the gym today. I feel great. I look great. Like these are things that is maximum pleasure, Judge. So again, long-term is counted into hedonist. So I'm going to go into way. So the first really big voter is human nature, right? This is a huge point on if human nature is inherently violent, inherently selfish, then that's what they're saying. But we're saying that no, that people, yeah, sure, there are people that, industries that exploit human nature, but that we are saying that going with human nature is hedonism. Going with human nature is creating good relationships. They, you can go with their arguments on like the pornography industry, but that exploits human nature. It's not inherently human nature, it's trying to exploit it. It's getting into that loophole. And so ultimately, you vote for our side on human nature because, again, we are the side that believes that humans aren't just inherently bad, and that we believe that exploitation makes humans bad, not inherent human nature. And so the second main voter is like, who actually goes to the world? What is the world like today? Well, we say asceticism is about self-discipline, constraining yourself, but we tell you that hedonism is taking full control, like accepting everything that the world actually has to offer. And so we're talking about fulfillment. You will not be fulfilled if you're kind of not fully accepting the amazing things that our world has to offer, the pleasure that it has to offer, and that is what asceticism does. It's not fully embracing the world, and so ultimately we win this point. And so like on this value of fulfillment, right? They say like mastery is the ultimate fulfillment, but we say trying to achieve pleasure is a purpose, and that gives you fulfillment. Again, it goes with human nature. It takes full abundance of what society has to offer. Again, the hedonists, they see the roses and they smell it because it makes them happy, it makes them feel good. And so if you believe that taking full advantage of the amazing things our world has to offer, taking full advantage of living your life to the maximum it can possibly be, then you are voting for the hedonist side, and that is the government. And I urge you to vote. Thank you.
Great debate.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Should we step outside while you guys deliberate?
We're not going to deliberate. We just individually come to.
Or yeah, like you guys individually.
I don't care if you guys stay in the room. That's fine.
Okay, we're gonna.
Yeah.
We'll just, yeah.
I didn't know that song was a thing.
saying you wanted me to get them?
Oh,
Let's see another minute.
Oh,
Yeah,
perfect,
we can
okay.
get them too. Thank you.
I'm ready.
Cool. All right. I'll probably just give my feedback first. Good job, everybody. This was a fun debate round. Cool topic. Both of y'all did really well. I ended up voting for the neg. I think that the negative is controlling the definitions and the framing debate in a way that the affirmative just can't keep up with. I think a lot of this debate comes down to, do I buy the affirmative's argument that like a full emphasis of pleasure could include the subjugation of current pleasure for long-term pleasure, meaning maximal pleasure? And I'm like, I could potentially buy that argument, but it would mean that I would have to ignore the fact that the AF conceded the pragmatist argument and conceded, and I think there's just too many concessions from the affirmative on the framing side for me to buy this definition of hedonism. I think that there's like a possible out for the affirmative by like arguing the true benefits of short-term pleasure. I think that there's like a really interesting case in there, but what it seems to be is that like over the course of the debate, the affirmative just bends more and more to the neg's definitions in an attempt to win, and I don't think that you're controlling like the debate narrative strong enough in order to win that, right? I think the negative has too many like real world arguments and too much reasoning that grounds this debate in much stronger definitions than the affirmative. I think that the same goes for the actual framing mechanism about like fulfillment versus individual happiness. Eventually, like the affirmative bends to that framing argument as well, which means that I can vote neg. And yeah, that's basically how I feel. I think that the affirmative would benefit from a more grounding with like real world examples of like hedonism. Rather than like appropriating some of the neg arguments. I think the neg should just define asceticism better, or at the beginning of the thing, because that like it allows you to weasel out more easily from a lot of affirmative arguments. So that's what I think. Good job, everyone.
So I also voted for the opposition side for this round. Just essentially kind of the same things. I think definitions and more clarity could be a lot more helpful for the gov side. And then I'll just kind of briefly talk about it because I need to type a little bit more, but just like this distinguishment between like fulfillment, purpose, and happiness, I feel like for the gov side, you guys are kind of running around in circles a little bit about that. Like with the gym example, I think that example itself kind of hurts you a little bit. Just because like you talk about like people go to the gym because they have purpose, they want to be happy, blah blah, and then they talk about like in the short term or long term going to the gym. You guys talk about the long term and be happy, but in the short term like there's like a purpose, like their purpose and the meaning in life and happiness. Then you guys want to talk about going to the gym and then later down the road you're going to be happy. So it's like you guys kind of skip like. It's like you're skipping certain like middle ground. You're just only looking to they go to the gym in the future they're gonna be happy. It's like what about like the middle parts of it? And then then also they talk about human nature and like pornography and stuff. And then you guys respond and say that like exploitation makes like humans bad and stuff. And then they talk about like the pornography and stuff. But it's like also it's like how do you know the people how do you know happiness? Like for instance like if I don't know if this is true, but like say pornography makes someone happy, like how are you gonna defend that saying that like that's not like if pornography makes someone happy and they're saying that like that's a bad thing, it's kind of contradictory a little bit. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a little contradictory because like you can't really say what specifically makes someone happy. So yeah, I'll explain a little bit more. I'm just still kind of typing, but essentially I just wish that you guys had more like grounding definitions and like your case wasn't like it kind of seemed like you guys were conceding to their side a lot. So yeah, I'll explain a little bit more. I'm just still trying to get my thoughts together, but
Okay.
Alright, great.
Thank you so much.
Good job, y'all.
Fantastic.
Yeah.